you. And it is my pleasure to introduce our first webinar from the BioCaddy project, which is for developing a data discovery index for biomedical and healthcare data sets. And our first speakers are from New York University School of Medicine, and we'll talk about building a data catalog, promoting data reuse and collaboration at an academic medical center. We will have one webinar per month. This will be recorded, and they will be available in our website. So let me briefly introduce the two speakers and thank them for coming. Kevin Reed is the Knowledge Management Librarian at the New York University School of Medicine, where he works to develop services and tools to support research data management and sharing. Lisa Serkis is Translational Science Librarian at New York University School of Medicine, working with the development of services and tools that promote and support data management and sharing, team science, and research efficiency. So welcome our both speakers to our very first webinar of the BioCaddy project.
Okay, thank you, Lucilla. And it's a pleasure for us to be here today. Like Lucilla said, my name is Kevin Reed, and I'm the Knowledge Management Librarian here at NYU Health Sciences Libraries, and I'm here alongside with my colleague, Elisa Serkis, who is a Translational Science Librarian. And our plan today is to talk about our data catalog, which is currently set up to describe but not store external data sets. Now, what I mean by external data sets are large publicly available data sets like census data, National Health Survey data, and statewide health administrative data, among other things. And the next plan for our data catalog is to ingest internal data sets. So our plan for today is to discuss the story of the data catalog, including how we've got to where we are today and where we plan to go in the near future. So to do that, we're going to be discussing who has been involved in the process of developing the catalog, our strategies, including how we have been tackling our metadata, and address our next steps and future goals for the catalog.
So I'm going to give a little context as to what entities are either currently involved in the data catalog or will be involved as the project evolves. As Kevin said, we're in the Health Sciences Library, so to place us within our institution, we're under the NYU Langone Medical Center, but we also have a dotted line to the Division of Libraries, which is part of the NYU main campus. And the main campus and the Med Center are separate in many ways. It's separate campuses, separate IT systems, so different authentication systems. So there are a lot of gaps to be bridged between the Med Center and the main campus, and the libraries form one such bridge. And another bridge is the CTSI. This is our Clinical and Translational Science Institute, and it's based at the Medical Center, but the other schools at NYU are also partners in the CTSI. So that's another entity that works to bridge that gap. And one of the core missions of the CTSI is promoting collaboration, so they have a role in data sharing, and my role is as the library's liaison to the CTSI. So this has been instrumental in connecting the library with these efforts. And another important player is our Department of Population Health, which is also strongly tied to the CTSI through their Community Engagement and Population Health Research Corps. And a lot of the research done in the Department of Population Health uses those large external data sets that Kevin mentioned. They're a group that's also pretty open to sharing data, and a lot of the clinical informatics work at our institution has been coming out of that department. So research IT, that's part of our larger medical center IT department. They provide a number of research support applications, including electronic data capture applications such as REDCap or Velos, and they also deal with research data storage and data governance. So the data catalog is actually one of the services provided by DataCore. And DataCore is a centralized institutional hub for clinical research data support. The CTSI, Department of Population Health, Research IT, and the library all have a role in this data core. And the data core has three main functions. One is supporting clinical research data management. Another is providing access to clinical data for research. And the third is engaging in data set curation. So that's our part of it, which that also involves storage and access. But it's also the cataloging that we're talking about today. So we're basically the discovery component on top of this curation. So back to libraries, we work mainly with researchers from the School of Medicine and the College of Dentistry here, but our services are also available to others across NYU, and similarly the larger division of libraries services are available to our researchers. But there are a number of research areas across departments and schools within NYU that are primarily served not by us but by the Division of Libraries, but that have the kind of data that we'd be very interested in having in our catalog: nursing, bioengineering, neuroscience, and many others. And we've begun conversations with those librarians about how we can align our efforts with what's going on around data at those schools. And we've also had conversations specifically with our library at our Abu Dhabi campus, where there's an increasing amount of research being done. So the catalog can serve as another way to bridge gaps to a campus that's geographically quite separate. So next I'm going to talk about what drove this implementation. As I mentioned, the Department of Population Health are heavy users of these large external data sets. And an initial concern that was raised was that researchers might be paying for data sets that we have or could get into institutional licenses for, or that other researchers might already have data use agreements that would allow them to share. Other barriers that were identified were a difficulty in knowing how to access data sets or how to work with data from a particular data set. And while the Department of Population Health are the heaviest users of these data sets, this is data that's used by researchers in a number of other departments across the medical school and across other schools at NYU as well. So from a library perspective, we saw a centralized catalog of these data sets as a solution to many of these issues. In addition, back in the spring 2013, the Big Data to Knowledge Initiative put out an RFI about the Data Discovery Index, and we put together a response to that in our library. And this is around the time the work with population health was starting. So at that time, that really solidified our thinking that we really wanted to eventually expand the scope of the catalog to include internal data sets from our own researchers as well.
So during this time, I was also working as an associate fellow with the National Library of Medicine, and the bulk of my time was actually spent working with the NIH Big Data to Knowledge Initiative to inform the initial efforts of what was then called the NIH Data Catalog. And then once I saw the RFI come in through NYU, and I found that our interests aligned quite well, I ended up spending my second year of my fellowship with NYU so that we could drive the catalog forward at the institution. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to discuss now sort of the first part of our strategy, which was our initial approach. And that initial approach was really to just give the people what they want. So we chose to focus on external data sets first because we had a direct need from the Department of Population Health. And we figured without that specific need, there would be no need for a catalog. So we wanted to focus on what was available now and what people could make use of now. We decided to wait and deal with internal data sets in the future, and we knew this would be a difficult task, but we wanted to build a foundation for the data catalog that we could then build out from. And finally, our goal was to maximize the functionality of the catalog so we could try and generate as much use and interest as possible. So one of the ways we did this was by identifying local experts at our institution who had familiarity with these external data sets. So initially what we did was we identified researchers by searching through grant and publication data to see who would actually use these external data sets effectively within their research. We also worked with a collaborator at the Department of Population Health named Jessica Athens, who was extremely helpful for outreach for us to get these people on board with being local experts for the data sets. And these researchers also include staff from both the medical center here at NYU as well as NYU main campus. And the goal here was to facilitate research and foster collaboration so that a researcher could search within the catalog, look at a data set, and be able to contact the experts of those data sets within the institution. Another goal of ours was to facilitate access to the data sets in any way possible. So currently the library hosts New York State-wide Planning and Research Cooperative System data, otherwise known as SPARCS data, that we have a license to. And the catalog was a perfect venue to make this data set known. We also wanted to find other data sets that were relatively unknown to most researchers here at the institution. So the University Health Consortium, or UHC data, is most often used by our Clinical Quality and Effectiveness division. So we were able to get in contact with them, and the catalog is able to describe those data sets as well. In terms of other types of functionality, we've included PubMed searches that retrieve articles from where the external data set has actually been used. And we wanted to link together related data sets within the catalog. So whether these were linkage data sets available online, like the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey data, or the National Interview Health Survey data, or data sets from the same publisher, for example, the Healthcare Cost and Utilization Project has a number of data sets that come out of that publisher. So we wanted to make sure those relationships were established. And we also wanted to make sure that the national and local data set versions were available. Like the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey also has a New York City component to it. And within all this, we wanted to make sure within the metadata that we added a context note within the catalog to describe what these relationships mean between the data sets, because we felt that would be of high use to our researchers. And speaking of metadata, I'm going to start to focus now on the strategies we took to looking at the metadata specifically. And this all started with my work again as an associate fellow at the National Library of Medicine, where I was responsible for building this web page of NIH data sharing repositories. For those of you who aren't familiar with this page, it includes all of the NIH-supported data repositories and information about how to submit or access data from these repositories. And one of my roles as an associate fellow was to analyze the commonalities of the metadata from each of these repositories for the initial data catalog when it came out. And this information was extremely valuable to serve as the core components of the beginnings of our own metadata schema. We also looked at other existing metadata schemas, knowing full well that some of them might not suit our needs perfectly. So for example, Nature Publishing Group scientific data was far too comprehensive for our needs, but we found that the W3C data catalog vocabulary, as well as Dryad and DataCite schemas, helped fill in some of the gaps that we needed to make sure we were describing these data sets adequately. Another approach that we took was strategy over purity here. So we knew that what we were doing in terms of combining external and internal data sets might be messy and not be ideal for what a metadata purist was thinking of, but we knew that we had this need for external data sets now, so we felt we would deal with it and build out from there. And some of the issues we know we were going to run into is obviously with our PubMed searches. Currently with external data sets, the search links out to a number of articles that use the data set, but if we were to generate internal research data sets, it would most likely link to the article where that data was collected. We also know that for local experts, that's really only an external data set function only, because people would assume that the internal data set, the author or the creator of that data set would be the expert. And then in terms of authorship overall, the external data sets are usually authored by an organization or an institution, whereas the author of an internal research data set would be the researcher itself. And this is just a snippet of our metadata schema as it currently exists. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I'm happy to share this documentation or the documentation from my earlier study with the NIH if anyone's interested after the presentation. So now we've given you an overview of our strategies and our initial approaches and what the metadata looks like. I thought we'd just take some time to delve into what the data catalog looks like in its current state. So here we have the front face of the data catalog, and you can click out to the link if you'd like at the bottom. And what the data catalog we wanted to focus on was keeping it as minimal as possible. So we have a search bar at the top, and as you search, it refines your results. You can sort by relevance, you can sort alphabetically, and you can also sort by the date that it was added. And we've also included some filters along the side to help refine the search as well. And you might notice that right now our metadata and our interface is pretty population health focused, and that goes back to our strategy versus purity approach. We know that the population health department was going to be using this exclusively for now, so that's what we decided to have the filters on the front page. But we are going to be making sure that we maintain functionality as the catalog expands in scope. And as for example, the geographic coverage and the time frame you see there are very population health specific and might not necessarily need to be applied to internal research data sets. And we also know that there's going to be an increase in subject domains. So right now we have a nice tidy set, but as we start to get scope creep and more data sets within there, we're going to start getting more and more domains that are going to need to be on the front page or in some way that people can help search for it. So to go into the actual record of a data catalog, I'm just going to go through it quickly. We have the unique identifier at the top that we give each record within the catalog. We have a detailed description, a link to the publisher. We also have the time frame and geographic coverage that I already discussed. We have the local experts, and what this does is when you click on the link of the person's name, it takes them to their NYU BioSketch page, which also has their email address so they can be contacted. Then we have the subject matter, and these are actually based on medical subject headings. or what we like to say is mesh light or mesh-ish, because we found that for searchability and for search functionality, some of the mesh headings were describing things too specifically. So for example, if someone in the catalog wanted to search cancer, the mesh heading for cancer is neoplasms. So we wanted to make sure we switched that to cancer, but kept track of what we kept as mesh and what we changed. We also have keywords that fall outside the control vocabulary. We have an access link directly to the data set that's housed within the website. We have the restrictions, so describing whether the data is free to all, whether there's a fee, or whether the researcher will have to have an application. Detailed access instructions through here, the data set type, the format, and the size. There's the PubMed search I talked about earlier. We then have the related data sets, which links to the other data set within the data catalog, and then that context note that I discussed earlier. So something else we've done to improve our workflow is build a contact us form that will allow researchers to volunteer themselves as local experts of external data sets, or suggest external data sets that aren't already described within the catalog. And then this is also our first attempt to get ingesting of data sets by having them request an uploading of their own data set so they can start describing them, and we can start getting those into the catalog as well. And we found that just today this has already worked for us. We've had a few come in, and it's looking promising as one option for them to get in contact with us. And then the technical components, I by no means am someone who is well versed in this. That task goes to our brilliant tech guy, Ian Lamb. And what he's done in terms of building the physical catalog is it's built on the Apache Solr search engine, which also serves as a flat database to store all of our metadata. And then everything else is done using JavaScript, so in using different scripts to structure, display, and have people interact with the web page. And there's an asterisk beside the backbone JavaScript because Ian felt that it was easier to use PHP scripts than to use something that already exists like this. That was just a suggestion for him. And we have here that it says we will use Google Analytics to measure some of the impact of our research, but that was actually just implemented this morning. And we also plan to look at other ways that we can measure the impact and use of this catalog moving forward.
So I'm going to talk about what I see as the three major issues that we're going to have to deal with in building out this catalog. And that's promotion, scalability, and maintenance. And the very important thing that connects all of these issues is resources. So right now, this catalog is something that there's quite a bit of interest in, but we're still working on getting significant institutional support. So we are keenly aware of resources, and we see promotion as the key. If nobody uses the catalog, we're not going to be able to make an effective case for resources. So, we're likely going to end up with not that many data sets in the catalog, and it's not going to be that well maintained, which makes the catalog more and more difficult to promote. So I'm just going to go through some of the issues with these. And first, promotion. So when we're talking about promotion of the catalog, there's two sides to that. Promotion to get people to search the catalog, and then also to get people to put their metadata in there. So to promote the catalog in the long run, of course, we want to do broad outreach, things like email blasts, but right now what we're doing is reaching out to more targeted groups. And particularly at this early stage, these are the people whose feedback is going to be key to making this a better resource overall. And another way that we feel that will raise the visibility of it is that this data catalog has a lot of owners. The Data Corps, the CTSI, the library, the Department of Population Health, they all have a hand in it, so it's going to sort of be filtered out through all of those, the people that these groups interact with. And then we're planning to have the data from the catalog discoverable through multiple systems, through the catalog itself, of course, and also eventually through the NYU main library catalog, through research networking systems, and I'll talk more about that later. So scalability, a number of factors and issues there. First of all, as we move out to internal data sets, we're going to need to get an idea of how long it's going to take to ingest each data set or all the data sets for a particular researcher. Obviously, this is going to be very variable, but we need to do some sort of benchmarking there. Eventually, we're going to need to figure out how many people we're going to need to do this work, what the demand is going to be. And a big question is to what degree and at what point can we push out data set upload to researchers? So there's a technical component to that, but I think the core of it is that if we reach a point where instead of begging researchers to catalog their data here, they're beating down our doors to do that, then that's going to be the point certainly where we can switch over and start thinking more seriously about that. Maintenance. Fortunately, the library has been curating a database of faculty publications for many years, so some of these maintenance issues are not entirely new to us. That database already gets feeds from a faculty data mart from our enterprise data warehouse, that information about the researchers, and then we're soon going to be adding some HR feeds from our main campus, so we'll have information about researchers there as well. So we'll know when local experts or researchers who have data in the catalog leave the institution, but what does that mean? Are the researchers going to take the data with them? Is it stored at our institution? Maybe it's in a public repository. So as far as that part goes, it's a much more complicated workflow than for publications. And it's pretty clear that there's going to be some data that it's no longer going to make sense to have published. You know, we don't want people who are searching to come up across a data set where the researcher and the data are no longer here. So we're going to have to establish some sort of an archival state for records and figure that out. One thing that should make tracking the researchers easier is a plan at the medical center to assign ORCIDs to all of our researchers by spring 2015, so that should help in part with that. And then the other thing is that moving people is only part of the problem. Sometimes the issue is moving data. One happy example would be data that moves from a thumb drive into a public repository, but how do we track that? You know, we can do periodic surveys to try to assess that, but we're never going to get a perfect response rate, so this is going to be a challenging issue.
And then a bonus issue that we've encountered was actually based on some of the work I did at the National Library of Medicine as well, was how do we define a data set? So during my time as an associate fellow, I worked on a study to better understand the estimated number of data sets that are created from NIH-funded articles in a given year. And during that time, we had 30 people from the National Library of Medicine, from BD2K, and other NIH researchers analyze a number of articles and trying to find the number of data sets within each article. And what we found was that there was a distinct discrepancy in terms of people's understanding of what a data set was. So some people felt that all the data within an article was considered one data set. Other people felt that the different data types within an article constituted their own data sets. And some people felt that every single measurement and data collection was considered a data set all of its own. So we're very aware of this moving forward because we need to figure out what kind of data are we going to get from our researchers. How do they think about what a data set is? And if they give us a data set with multiple different data types within it, how are we going to go about describing that data? Are we going to ask them to parse it out, or are we going to just take it the way it is so that what we were able to do is describe it and generate use and create a low barrier for that researcher? So keeping that in mind, we come to the second part of our strategy, which is our next steps for generating interest and getting those internal data sets in to the data catalog. And the first thing is to build a community of users. We're going back to that strategy of over purity approach, and we're looking for those external data sets to form a strong base and a strong core from which we can build out upon. We also want to make sure that the initial internal data sets are going to be within similar domains to those external data sets. So that Department of Population Health data, for example, would be perfect to align with what we already have within the catalog. We're also hoping for scope creep. So as we start to build out from these external data sets, we hope we can move into some clinical research data, as well as look into some of the more health-focused social science data, and then deal with basic science data down the road. So we can start to branch out and grow our base as we move. We're also very aware of internal data curation. So we're going to start with a very low bar for inclusion. So if a researcher shows us a flash drive with a bunch of data sets, that's going to be okay for us to to describe. We were going to have to revisit that at some point, but for now we want to generate use and we want to generate interest, so we're going to take each data set on a case-by-case basis. We also want to start ingesting slowly, so we're very aware that the addition of internal data sets are going to lead to changes in our workflow, especially if we start to get a large influx of data, and the metadata might need to change as our scope creep starts to move in. A bonus issue is that the library here performed a series of interviews with researchers at our institution in population health, in clinical research, and in basic science research. And our Department of Population Health showed the most willingness to share research data as well as use other people's research data. So they're the perfect fit for us to move forward and build out from that community and that core of external data sets that we already have described in the catalog. So for our promotional strategies, we demoed the data catalog at the Department of Health's faculty meeting this morning, just hours ago, and it was received very well. And now our next plan is to set up meetings and reach out to small different research areas in the Department of Population Health to get some of those data sets described and put into the catalog. We're also planning to demo the data catalog to the Global Institute of Public Health. One, because they have like-minded data sets to the external data sets that already exist within the catalog, and also because they cover 11 schools across NYU. So there's a large potential uptake there to grow this data catalog and move it forward.
And now for the fun part, I'm going to talk about future directions. So we're in the planning stages of a number of ways of bringing more data sets into the catalog and also of increasing the visibility of those data sets. So the catalog is one piece of the data core, as I said, and the other parts of the data core involve the creation of data sets. So an important future direction is in creating a workflow around the interaction of all of these three data core components. So this diagram shows a planned clinical research data workflow, and there's data, this is our electronic health record over here, and data that is pulled from that and used to create analysis data sets. Those analysis data sets are then analyzed and written up in publications or reports. And then another type of analysis data sets are those that come from clinical research. So it could be from data that's coming from perhaps an NYU patient, a patient from an external site that's coming in through our electronic data capture systems. And again, this analysis data set is created, is analyzed, and put into publications and reports. So we have these two different types of internal analysis data sets. And so this is a plan for a future workflow that will provide storage. So this is these internal analysis data sets showed on the previous slide, and then also in external data sets, like the Sparks data that Kevin talked about earlier. So the idea would be that the data core would host all of these types of data sets, and the metadata from those data sets would then feed into the data catalog. Those hosted data sets, there could be data pulls from them that would then create new reanalysis data sets, and again, that metadata would feed back into the data core. So again, this is for the future, but we're really excited about this. We see this, something like this as being one of the keys to success of the catalog, to be able to get all of those data sets, the metadata from them, from that large body of data sets into the catalog. So another future direction, again, that we're very excited about is collaboration with those librarians from our main campus. And we've discussed with different groups down there collaborations around discovery and around curation. So working with the Digital Library Technology Services group at our main campus to plan development of an API for the catalog so that they can harvest our metadata included in their data discovery system. And then that would also be part of their future plans to pipe all of that into the main library catalog. So, and then librarians from our main library are also interested in describing internal data sets on that campus. So we are working out a way that we can also ingest relevant data sets from there into our catalog, either directly or through their discovery system. Another avenue for data set discovery will be a planned integration with Profiles research networking software. So this is software for discovering researchers based on their interest, and here at NYU we're in the process of implementing Profiles. Now, publications are always the core of these types of systems, but they often also include other academic products like patents or reports or grants. And Profiles in particular has an open research networking gadget standard developed by UCSF that has been used by institutions to easily build gadgets that include other types of academic outputs. You can see here websites or videos. So our plan is to build one of these widgets that will display the data sets in the researcher's profile. So this can build the visibility of the catalog, enhance the capabilities of the research networking system, and do more towards promoting collaboration. And finally, we hope to continue the conversation around what's happening with the development of the Data Discovery Index so that in the future we can facilitate the indexing of our data sets into that catalog.
So with that, Elise and I would just like to thank you all for your time and attention. It's honestly been a privilege for us to speak with you about our current project. While we realize it's only a small sample, we hope that some of the challenges we face and the strategies we've used might help you or at least inform some of your efforts moving forward. So with that, we'd be happy to hear any questions or comments or even feedback about anything we've discussed today, and thank you again for your time. Much appreciated.
The conference has been unmuted.
Well, thank you both. It's been fascinating learning about how it's about in your institution. I must say that mine has similar needs. We also are part of the CTSA consortium, and discussing internal and external data sets is very important. There is a question on the chat box that we might get started with that one from Ron.
Sure. Ron, I'm just curious what you mean by how they'll be validated. At what point, and maybe if you could elaborate on that a little bit, that would be great. I don't know if he has a phone.
Can we see Ron's question?
I mean, my question was about how is data validated, and I guess it's sort of in the back of my mind, turning over. You know, there's a lot of data out there. Some of it has been validated through publications, although there might be those who would quibble with the interpretations. But then there's a lot of other data that might be useful, might not be, and I'm just wondering, how do you validate what is good data? Because data in, data out, if it's garbage in, garbage out, then it's of no value, and in fact you may be clouding the literature with bad data. So this is just something that I've been thinking about all along.
Yeah, I mean, what I anticipate is in terms of internal data sets that for the vast majority, what's going to be the case is that people are going to share the metadata about their data sets only after they've published. So I think that the validation, I don't think that's something that we would be taking on.
This is Lucille. I had a question too regarding your internal data sets. You did not mention it, and I don't know if that's the case. But do you, when researchers from NYU find those internal data sets and they are protected human subjects, do they get amended IRBs to include those, or do you deal with the permissions? Is that your portion, or is it then falls onto the data owner or investigator?
So since we're not actually providing access to the data, we're providing access to information about the data. The issue of PHI doesn't really come up with the catalog. It's going to come up with that sort of storage and access that the other parts of the data core are doing, and the plan there is that there's going to be different levels of access. There may be anonymized data sets, clinical data sets that can just be downloaded, and others that would require some sort of IRB approval to get access to.
I see. Thank you. Very helpful. So there are a few more questions in the chat box. Maybe you can go in sequence.
Okay, there's a question about the metadata work, Kevin.
Yes, this is Hyun Kim from UCSD, and this is great talk and very informative, and thanks for that. So I'm very interested in the metadata work that you did with NIH data sharing repository. So you basically extracted the potential metadata items from the existing data repository, also look at the other more standardized sources, right? So that's exactly what we are proposing to do as the metadata groundwork. So you probably explained it, but I probably have missed it. But could you share your experience or insight on the utility of the other more standardized metadata in this project? I mean, and also I really love to get the metadata schema documentation that you generated.
So do you mean the one from the original work I did on the NIH?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I found were a lot of very general commonalities, but what wasn't really covered in this metadata was the specifics of some of the different data types and how those could potentially be described. So the real descriptors of the data weren't there, but some of the more general metadata fields or metadata elements, whatever you want to call them, were covered in that original set. And they did also map relatively well to some of the things that DataCite or Dryad had come out with. But the issue we ran into was that when it came down to really describing what the data was, there was no real metadata element there that did that. And what we found from that study was that something was going to have to be developed in order to be able to adequately describe data sets, because things like mesh don't really work for it, and other ontologies potentially haven't been thought about from a data perspective. So that's sort of what came out of what we looked at from the commonalities that we found. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And can I also get a copy of your metadata schema documentation? I would
Of
love
course,
to.
yeah. If you want to just send us an email at the end of,
Okay.
I can put it. I think I can type it into the chat box as well. But I'm happy to send anything and everything, honestly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So how is the clinical data anonymized? As I said, we're not dealing with that on our end. Dave Eichmann had a question about the Solr index. It's indexing everything that's within the metadata, which includes a description of the data set, but not the data, there's no other data set content that is part of the catalog so that is being indexed. It's just whatever description, keywords, domains, and so forth that we're using. And then what entity will be assigning the ORCIDs and how will researchers be notified they have an ORCID ID. That is being done through our IT department. That ORCID ID is then going to be used in our enterprise systems for consistency across systems, but I don't know what the plans are in terms for notifying the researchers.
And we can find that out, and we can share that information as well when it's available.
Great. Are there any other questions? I see one more.
Yes, hi. This is Susanna Sansone from Oxford. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question specifically on your earlier point, because you said you compared the metadata that Scientific Data and Dryad have. And I'm actually, because I'm also personally involved with both, I'm very interested to know the metadata that you didn't find that you wanted to find, because it's not clear to me which kind of metadata you were looking.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Because I think the phone rang while you were speaking about that question. I didn't hear it as effectively as I could. Sorry, I don't mean to get you to repeat that, but.
No, I understand. I heard also the same noise. So
okay, good.
I don't know if I still was on or not. So I don't exactly which metadata you were after, because you said you didn't find it into the metadata that Scientific Data and Dryad have, and somehow because I'm involved in both Dryad and Scientific Data, I will be interested to know what were you after.
I think I meant more in the sense that what nature, maybe I probably misspoke there. What I was trying to say was that the complexity and the amount of metadata that was available from Nature's from the scientific data was not, we just looked at it and felt that we could go with something simpler for the time, which is why we went back to Dryad. So I know that some of those baseline metadata elements are there, but it was when Scientific Data went into further description that we decided for the time being it was not appropriate for us. I don't know if that clarifies for you, but it was just for us, we actually found it quite intimidating to start out with, and because we knew we had a specific group of users who had a very specific need, we felt that it wasn't suitable for us at the time, whereas sort of the general basic Dryad metadata schema kind of made it more digestible for us moving forward.
Sure, no, that answered the question. Thank you. I would have been worried if you were stayed the other round, that you didn't find, because I agree with you. What we store in Scientific Data has been more detailed.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so there's another question about the complexity of how to define a data set, and if we had any conclusion. And the answer to that is really no. We just had more discussion about it. This is actually going to be published relatively soon, but there was a lot of things that went into this study about how people felt about a data set and how much data is produced each year. But we ended up just sort of discussing what people thought they could define a data set as and the different interpretations of a data set, but no conclusions were made.
And then there's a question about the feedback we received from the Department of Population Health and the data catalog this morning. People were very interested. We've already had more people volunteer to be local experts and to suggest external data sets and other ideas for sort of the finding a way to use the data catalog to get at pieces of code that people have written for help for reading in these data sets or pulling out certain components of the data sets. So it was a very positive reaction, and there seemed to be a lot of interest. And I think we have somebody who says they're going to...
Ian, you said you were going to ask a verbal question?
And then there's
Yeah,
hand
so
raised,
it sort of follows... can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ian.
Yeah, it sort of follows on from that. It sounds like you...
Ian, you're breaking up. I can't hear you very well.
Let me try this. It's great to see what you've embarked on here and that you've shared it with the department this morning and maybe others. As we go forward with BioCaddy and the Data Discovery Index Consortium, what would be the best ways to stay engaged with how this develops for you and what you learn as you take it forward?
Oh, that's a great question.
And maybe partly for you, but also partly for Lucilla and others. As we hear about these kinds of activities, how do we keep everyone in the loop?
Great, and that's exactly what I was going to promote here, the engagement through three types of ways to get involved. One is to sign up to participate in one of our 3 task forces. The other one is to be a collaborator in our existing pilot projects, which are 1-year projects, and we are asking for people with expertise that complement each one of the pilot projects to send us a note, and it's displayed now in your screen, very short, so to speak, application in order to participate. And we will also issue a request for pilot projects for the next year, and those should be announced, the RFA in January, for responses on a brief proposal required to be due in March. So don't wait till then to get engaged, because this call for pilot project collaborators is up right now, and also the task forces are still being composed. So I would encourage you and everyone who is attending. We have a large list of attendees today, and we'll also record this for a later view, that you identify people who could help us start designing and determining best practices for building this data discovery index. So this is an invitation to engage.
Great.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, really want to, we would be very happy if any of our efforts could inform your work, and we would also very much like to align what we're doing so that eventually it's going to be the best service to our researchers if our efforts align with yours.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the less duplication we do, the better. So understanding your project and perhaps similar ones that are happening all around the world will be very, very useful to us. The other thing that I wanted to invite is those who would like to present in follow-up webinars to also contact us. We are delighted to have this kickoff webinar with such an interesting project. We still have a few more minutes for questions, and I see the chat box being filled very quickly. So I'll ask the speakers to manage the chat box.
Melissa Hendelis, about the the work on data set.
We did look at the W3C for data set description and realized it could help us potentially in the future as well with linked data, but we haven't broached that yet. We need to have someone to come in with more expertise in that area. And then what other questions do we have?
The ICPSR, we have looked at the ICPSR, and that does have a similar function of describing many data sets. We are kind of building out more slowly in terms of the data sets, because again, when we can provide extra functionality, I mean, people can go and look at ICPSR. We want to have the catalog here that's going to give them other functionality that's not available there. But yes, we have looked at that site. What are the properties of the unique identifiers that you use in identifying the data? I'm not sure I understand the question.
I don't either.
Well, this is Heidi Sophia. It's perhaps a bit technical, but I'm asking, are you just using kind of self-generated identifiers within your own local system, or do you have larger ambitions for the kinds of tasks that your identifiers could potentially serve down the road?
They are just self-generated identifiers, the former, and that is not something that we've really discussed.
No. I guess we also have another form of unique identifier in that the researchers have their institutional ID, which creates a unique identifier, but that's only within the system of NYU. So
right, and once they have ORCIDs, then that can be used to connect things up. But yeah, like I said, it's not something we really thought about, and we would love to hear more about
feedback or options of what we could potentially do, or what the benefits of doing that would be great for us to hear as well.
Yep.
Well, one thing I'll just throw out there, and this is something that we can talk about offline, is that the Global Alliance for Genomics and Healthcare is beginning to think about generating a very extensive and comprehensive way of developing unique identifiers that are content aware, that have some sort of awareness of the content of the data. So it's just something to keep an eye on as very interesting and very recent development.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, and okay. So, there any other
comments or questions?
This is George Alter. Can I ask you a question?
Of course,
yeah.
George.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the future persistence of the data in your catalog. I'm quite sympathetic to the idea that you're trying to get people to buy in, and if the data is on a thumb drive, that's okay for now. But in the future, that's going to create a problem because a lot of those thumb drives are going to disappear, and you're going to have catalog entries that don't point anywhere or point to a person who may not be maintaining the data. Do you have thoughts about where you plan to go in the future? It looked like from some of your diagrams you're actually creating an actual repository is part of the future plan.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't call it exactly a repository, but yes. And that would be a subset of the data sets. That's really just the clinical data sets pulled from our electronic health record, but others, particularly as we move out into basic sciences, those are not going to be going into that storage. Yes, we've thought about it. Yes, it's a huge issue. And, again, this is sort of where that strategy comes in, where we feel like that is a potentially problematic future, but getting to a potentially problematic future rather than no future at all seems worth kind of taking on, describing data sets that are on thumb drives, hard drives, whatever. So I think we are going to just kind of play this out and see what happens. Like I said, if nobody uses the catalog, we don't have a catalog. So we're going to kind of plunge into messy territory.
Well, I think that's fine to start with. I think maybe as you go along, developing training and data management so that you sort of ease people along in this might be one way to ease into it.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, part of that would be suggestions of other better places where they could put their data. And that's also, that's another side of. Strategically, I think it makes sense for us to build out from these external data sets, but in terms of content, but also when we did these data interviews, talked to basic science researchers, they were the most resistant to sharing their data. Mm-hmm. So I think as we sort of build out content-wise, hopefully that will align with a time in the future when there's more of the recognition among basic science researchers across the board that they do have to share their data, that they can't just keep it in their desk drawer, and so hopefully we will encounter, as we move forward into areas where we are more and more likely to see those thumb drives, there will be a decrease in how much we're going to be encountering that.
And we also expect these conversations to come up in the curation process of this internal data. So if someone comes to us with a thumb drive, we're obviously going to suggest other options for them to store it in a certain place. But if they don't want to, we're not going to say no to them anyways, because they still wanted to get it out, and if it's within the institution, as a start, that's fine for us. But each time we meet with someone, we will be suggesting better options for them to store their data and make it secure over time.
This is Mary Lynn Bergstrom. I'm in the Research Data Curation Program here at UC San Diego in the library, and I appreciate being included in being able to listen in on this webinar. And we've been in conversations with Lucilla about how the library and the metadata experts in this on our staff can be involved too. But we're at that same initial phase in terms of taking in research data. And that whole question about establishing appraisal and other metrics around research data sets that are also could be described as the intellectual assets of your organization. It's a tricky one, and it's very interesting. So I'll be curious to see how you folks are working on it. We're certainly working on it here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy later on as this progresses to give an update or feedback as we start to move forward. We'd be happy to do that as well.
Great. And related to this topic, I would ask perhaps one of the NIH representatives to let us know the status of the machine-readable data sharing plan, because that would tie into very much to this effort, including the one that was mentioned for the future of the researchers inputting their own data. So anyone wants to take or make a little comment or say this for next year, for 2016?
Hi, this is Ron. That's an interesting question. The comment I can make is I don't know. I don't know that there's been a deeper discussion as of yet on that. It's certainly one of Phil Bourne's objectives is to include machine-readable capabilities. But he's not here to answer the question specifically.
Okay. We would love to know anything about that, definitely. That will help our efforts greatly.
Yeah, and I think input into that process by folks who have done this kind of efforts will be very important. So we learn from what worked, what didn't work, and we recommend perhaps certain practices.
Okay.
So again, I think there's so many ways to get involved in this, and so much work to be done that it will never be too many people involved. I'm very pleased that this first webinar got so much participation in such a fascinating presentation, and I would hope you stick with us for the next ones as well, and that you do spread the word that we want as much input as possible and collaboration to make this effort multiply. So once again, I want to thank the speakers for being the first ones, and as you know, if the first one succeeds, it's a very good sign for the future, and I think we were very
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really a pleasure for us.
And thank you all for attending, and we'll see you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.